I now declare open the public hearing of the Standing Committee on Education's inquiry into building Asia capability in Australia through the education system and beyond. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which we all meet today and pay respect to the elders past and present of Indigenous peoples across Australia. This hearing will be audio broadcast and the transcript of proceedings will be published on the Parliament's website. I might begin by inviting members of the committee present here today to introduce themselves. I might start with Ms Cheney's end.
Hello, Kate Cheney, a member for Curtin in Western Australia.
Hello, I'm Karina Garland. I'm the member for Chisholm in Melbourne.
My name's Tim Watts. I'm the chair of the committee and the member for Gellibrand in Melbourne's West.
Zee Soon, the member for Banks in southwestern Sydney.
Tracy Roberts, member for PS in Western Australia.
I now welcome representatives from the Department of Defence and the Department of Home Affairs to give evidence today. For the benefit of Hansard, would you begin by please stating your full name and the capacity in which you're appearing before the committee? We might start from the right.
Good morning. My name is Karen Radford from the Department of Defence, Assistant Secretary, North Asia and South Asia in International Policy Division.
Good morning. My name is Major General Martin White. My position within Defence is as the Commander of the Australian Defence College.
Good morning, Michael Willard, Deputy Secretary, Immigration Programs Group from the Department of Home Affairs.
Sneha Chatterjee, First Assistant Secretary, Office for Multicultural Affairs in the Department of Home Affairs.
Malcolm McAllister, Assistant Secretary, Special Envoy Support and Grants Programs in the Office for Multicultural Affairs in the Department of Home Affairs.
Well, this hearing is a legal proceeding in the Parliament and it has the same standing as proceedings of the House. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of the Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Do either of the departments wish to make an opening statement before we proceed to discussion?
No, thanks, Chair. Welcome your questions.
A very brief one, if you want, Chair. Thank you. So, again, just to thank the committee for the opportunity to discuss the defence aspects of this important inquiry into building Asia capability. I think Defence will echo previous testimony that speaks to the importance of high levels of cultural, linguistic and people-to-people understanding of Asia, and in our context, understanding Asian security institutions. We think building Asia capability is fundamental to Australia's national defence strategy. My role is as the Commander of the Australian Defence College. In this role, it consists of a number of organisations, including the Australian Defence Force Academy and the Australian War College. We also comprise units including the Australian Defence Force Training Centre, which houses the Defence International Training Centre and the Defence Force School of Languages, which I think are germane to the inquiry today. Just within the Australian Defence College, I'd like to highlight that we have more than 200 international staff and students today, most of whom are from Asian nations, engaging with their Australian counterparts daily on security issues. I think the scale of engagement with our Asian counterparts is long-standing, and I think the need to build Asian capabilities in many ways hardwired into our military education and training system. But thank you very much for the opportunity today.
Well, thank you for that. I'm conscious that we have both Defence and Home Affairs representatives here, so I might try to, well, I'll certainly ask my defence questions first. I'd encourage others to seek the call on a similar topic in the same order, but I'm not going to be too rigorous on that. Just using the Chair's prerogative, can I start with some questions of Defence? And can I put these in the context of thanking you for the very significant commitment that the Department of Defence and ADF has shown, I think over some decades now, to engagement with our region and building Asia capability within its own organisations. And I think that your submission to this inquiry was extensive and really engaged with what we are grappling with here in a substantive way. So let me begin by saying thank you and recognising that. One thing that did catch my attention in the Defence submission was the point that you make that, quote, language skills are acquired, this is in the defence sphere, language skills are acquired in an immersive adult learning environment in 1/3 of the time of an Australian university. Can I delve into that a bit more? What are the methods and pedagogical approaches that Defence takes to learning languages in your context and that lead to those outcomes? And what have you learnt from collaborating with the other language institutions you flag in your submission in peer nations?
Thank you, Chair. I think how I'd start, the Defence language capability, I think it really comprises two components. So it comprises people who join Defence who have got language skills, who have got a language other than English as something that they have when they join. And I think we run a census every 3 years. So in 2023, when the census was last conducted, about 30% of participants identified as being culturally and linguistically diverse, and about 16% of the participants identified as having a language other than English. So I think a large part of what we could and our potential language skills, I think, is resident within people who join with those existing language skills. The other part, I think, is what we teach, and that's predominantly conducted at the Defence Force School of Languages in Laverton in Victoria. We think, again, language and cultural understanding is critical to achieving those strategic objectives that we have as part of our national security requirements. But I think largely the thing that I'd highlight with those comments that were made in the submission is we focus specifically on military language skills. So if I was to give an example, we train for a range of reasons, but for operational reasons, it might be that we teach someone to say, there's an enemy unit on that hill with machine guns, and they're occupying that barracks, and it's heavily guarded, heavily fortified. So largely what we're trying to do is intensive training, very much focused on the military skills that we try to pass. And so I think it is, in some ways, it's a little bit difficult to compare sort of what universities teach, which is tends to be not that, versus what we do. But I think the intensive nature of the training, I think, has proven beneficial to Defence, albeit not perfect.
Yeah, okay. And that sort of focus on practical outcomes, does that let you sort of innovate more quickly on pedagogical approaches? Like, one of the things I'm interested in is the way that AI is being used as a learning tool, not as a supplement for language learning, but to help people to practice conversational skills and in a deliberate practice way. Has your pedagogy incorporated those kinds of AI training into language learning?
I think it does, and I think with technology such as, I think, artificial intelligence, Defence will always, I think, have a requirement to move with the technology and also to maintain the human-to-human sort of skills as part of that. So we do have methodologies that are in play within the Australian Defence College, such as training with avatars for intensive training, as opposed to necessarily needing other people to do those type of things. But largely, the cultural aspects can't be ignored for us, and so having instructors who understand the culture as well as the language performs a really significant function for us. So I think there's a combination of both.
I just want to acknowledge my Deputy Chair, Mr Burrell, who was speaking in the chamber when we began this hearing, has joined us. So on 6 February, the Australia-Indonesia Treaty on Common Security was signed by Prime Minister Albanese and President Prabowo. And I note that a key part of this treaty is building ties through a junior leaders forum and military education exchange. And in that context, it reminded me of a May 2025 report from the University of Western Australia by Eleanor Power. That's Mutual Trust and Reciprocity, Strengthening the Australia-Indonesia Defence Partnership through Cooperative Training Exercises. And in that report, she noted that language learning is a core part of military exchange programs, arguing that, quote, by equipping cadets with additional language skills, particularly in Bahasa Indonesia, the ADFA would be better positioned to establish extended officer exchange programs with ACMIL. Power also argues that speaking Indonesian is critical for our defence engagement with Indonesia, arguing that, quote, ADF soldiers must achieve a basic level of proficiency in languages other than English to safely complete international deployments. I think that's going to the points that you were making earlier. And she quotes ADF interpreter during the 2024 Super Garuda Shield, who said, quote, language is not just words, it's the key to unlocking trust and understanding between cultures. Every time I use their language, Indonesians see me not as a foreigner, but someone who has taken the time to understand them. Presumably you would endorse all of those quotes. Okay. So in that context, I'm keen to understand the recent changes at ADFA that have been flagged in submissions to this inquiry. In their submission to this inquiry, the Embassy of Indonesia raised concerns about the cutting of the Indonesian major at ADFA. Now, I understand that Indonesian is no longer offered as a major as a part of the Bachelor of Arts program at ADFA, but that Indonesian studies can be taken as part of a broader Indo-Pacific studies major. Jump in and let me know after I've finished this. In the context of deepening our engagement with Indonesia through the Treaty of Common Security, can I understand the thinking behind what looks like reducing the ability of officers to acquire a deep knowledge of Bahasa Indonesia by cutting the Indonesian major at ADFA? Can you step us through what those changes are and what the rationale for them is?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah. So I think one of the things that our submission highlighted was that Bahasa and Mandarin were the two languages that were really doing as our most significant sort of numbers of qualified people, and so I think those numbers I think we'll see probably retain or grow. I think given the importance with the Australian Defence Force Academy, so the bachelor degree that focused predominantly on languages that did exist, and this is the last year where that is completed, and so there was an opportunity for students to study 4 subjects that related to languages. Really the demand, and I think this has been highlighted to this inquiry a number of times, the demand increased from students. So in the last couple of years...
Increase or decrease?
The demand decreased for languages. And so in the last couple of years, 2 to 3 students were signing up to that program. So it was an uneconomical way to do it. And so, in conjunction with the University of New South Wales, the decision was taken to reduce the number of language-specific courses from 4 to 2. But there remains the opportunity for students who attend the Australian Defence Force Academy to also take 2 more additional subjects in conjunction with an agreement we have with the Australian National University. So within UNSW and the Australian Defence Force Academy, there has been a reduction in that, mainly demand-driven. Where that has, I think, where the demand has increased, though, is in more of the geostrategic engagement with Indonesia. So there still seems to be, with students, a thirst for understanding and being educated in those geostrategic factors. And so those courses, for example, are attracting over 20 students at the moment. So I think that's what we're seeing through the Australian Defence Force Academy and UNSW.
Are we worried about that falling demand? I mean, we have heard lots of evidence about that complex supply-demand relationship in language studies. But I would have thought that of all of the domains that we're thinking of, the forward career progression for investing in Indonesian language studies, it's a most direct connection between obtaining those language skills and being able to directly use them in your career and advance as an officer. I mean, the Australia-Indonesia relationship in defence is extremely strong.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to understand this. Are we concerned about it? Are we trying to shift that level of demand amongst ADFA students?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, Chair. I mean, one of the things that our census in 2023 showed was that 0.8% of the folks who are joining defence now had Bahasa language skills. So I think that's a really important component of what we do. And I think certainly in the aspect of what we're teaching, that the Defence Force School of Languages remains, I think, our primary means to provide proficiencies. And so our numbers within the Defence Force School of Languages that we're training remain fairly consistent.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And one final question before I'll pass the call to colleagues. I mean, we've seen a precipitous collapse in Indonesian language studies in the high school, at the high school level in Australia. I hear what you're saying about the School of Languages, and I am proud to host it in my electorate in Melbourne's West. I know some of the teachers there, and they are world class. But I mean, presumably the system-wide decline in Indonesian studies does impact on you in terms of your recruitment, and that you'd prefer to be able to recruit young Australians with Indonesian cultural awareness and language skills rather than having to do all of that in-house once they arrive.
Absolutely, Chair.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Burrell, did you want to jump in? We've got Ms. Garland and Mr. Soon.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Garland.
Thank you.
Dr. Garland. Apologies.
That's all right. Doesn't matter. I am going to declare my bias as someone with a background in cultural studies here. So understanding, I guess, beyond language, what the Asian capability focus means, and looking at here the way that you've embedded cultural studies and that focus within a lot of different streams. I was wondering if you could unpack that a little bit in terms of explaining what that means, and it may be that it is that strategic focus that you're talking about, but just I'd love to get an overview of what that looks like across a lot of these courses, including things that are perhaps less obvious, like outside of the Indo-Pacific studies, things like English and media studies. I'm just really eager to understand what that Asian capability focus looks like.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Allen. I appreciate the question. I think, and certainly within my own command, so the Australian Defence College, we have a significant number of interfaces, particularly with. Is your question, based mostly on Indonesian or broader?
No, just more broadly. Like, what does that look like? Because obviously people can use Asian capability to mean a range of things, and I'm just really interested outside of the language that we've had a conversation about. What does that look like embedded in these courses that you offer?
Thank you. And perhaps to give you a couple of examples that may illuminate some of that. So our Australian War College runs a range of courses for mid-ranking and senior officers. And so within those courses this year, there's around 65 foreign officers who are in there, mostly from the Asian region. But they work with the Australian counterparts on a daily basis, discussing security matters that are relevant to everyone. But again, that level of daily interaction between our Australian officers and our foreign officers has consistently proven to be worth its weight in gold. I think there's an example where an old but fairly famous example of General Cosgrove, who, as he was going into to lead the Interfet contingent, knew his Indonesian counterparts, was able to engage with them, and it made the Interfet mission very, very effective and less dangerous for the folks on the ground. One of the interesting things that the Australian War College has is an alumni network of several thousand people. Just looking through the folks who have been part of that alumni network, there are over 40 who, just from Asian nations, who have occupied positions of service chief and higher, including defence minister. So again, I think the soft power component of that, I think, is super important. And so we
have royalty as well.
And we have, and so I think that aspect of the Australian War College, I think it really is hardwired into not just the Australian military, but a lot of our colleagues across the region have a similar model where they have a high number of international students, where it just means that our relations on a military to military level, you break down the difficulty at the start, and I think the General Cosgrove example is a good one.
So, just to clarify, so looking at your submission and on page 6 where there's the enrolments in different degree streams with the Asian capability focus, that's about the exchange, or is it about the course content as well? So I'm just thinking, if I'm studying, that arts, English and media studies stream, like what would I be learning that is about enhancing Asian capability?
I see. So that's specifically at the Australia Defence Force Academy. Yeah. So and so the content is quite broad within those degree streams. When we say the strategic environment, what are the security concerns that are shared between Australia and Indonesia? How do demographics make those play an impact? How do our does our history and our culture make that difference? So I think students who are enrolled in those programs, that tends to be the focus, and the ones who take language, I think, get that additional angle of cultural understanding in that sense. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just following on from that, and I think you've answered much of the question, but we have a thing called the Parliamentary Defence Exchange Program, and many of us participate in it, and I participated in it a couple of years ago and was part of Exercise Kakadu. Now that it was as much about developing the relationships personally between senior commanders of navies of Asian countries, yes. And it was incredibly successful. It was very profound for many of us that navies of countries we have have been our adversaries in the past, you know, Japan and Vietnam, all collaborating and cooperating. Is there plans to continue and expand those sort of exercises, not only the military exercises, but what I might call the social exercises, which were really important at developing those relationships and showing other people that those relationships are strong?
Thank you, Deputy Chair, for your question. I am Assistant Secretary for North Asia and South Asia, so cover those relationships and indeed the Japan relationship. First, I would say that Japan is a good example of how relationships have changed post-World II. There is no other country in the region which we are closer to than Japan, and that defence relationship has just grown and grown over decades, but I would say has particularly accelerated over the last 5 to 10 years with military exercises bilaterally with Japan, doing more and more together, importantly trilaterally with the United States. So defence ministers from the United States, Japan and Australia announced in November 2024 an effort to trilateralise bilateral exercises. So Australia has now participates in what was bilateral United States Japan military exercises, usually in Japan, which adds a lot to our own capability, our interoperability, but really importantly, how we understand each other and how we work together. Australia and Japan have become close in so many ways. One of the differences the United States and Japan has is there's something like 50,000 US forces located in Japan. So, of course, they work together every day. Australia and Japan are doing more and more together so that we understand each other, and that's not just how militaries operate together, but understanding each other's culture, and language is an important part of that as well. I don't have the dates for Kakadu, but it's coming up soon. And as you mentioned, Deputy Chair, is an excellent example of those quite large multilateral exercises that bring many partners together, small Pacific partners with their capabilities with big navies like Japan's, for example.
And I think for me, Deputy Chair, I mean, it goes without saying really, but while we've got ways that we can surge our language capability, you cannot surge trust. You know, that is something that you have to establish over a long period of time. And so I agree with your sentiments that is critical and remains critical, as I said. Thank you.
Mr. Seen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again to our defence colleagues for your submission to the committee. If I might just return back to the language training component, and it goes to what you just mentioned, Major General. Firstly, it'd be good to know any kind of feedback that you have from those that have kind of gone through the training or have considered it but decided not to, about their experience, particularly considering what seems to be diminishing kind of demand from that side of things about what can be done. And obviously we've heard it from other parts of the sector outside of the Defence Force, that being the case as well. And then the second question, and you were sort of mentioning like the surge capability in building language skills within the Defence Force. Has there been consideration given to like stronger incentives or even like mandating to a certain extent the training in language skills in order to boost that foundation base?
Thank you for the question. I think perhaps if I talk to the second part first. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2001, and when we deployed there was a very significant need for language capability, and I think and the way that we satisfied that gap was we had some of our own people trained. We paid for some contractors to support us. We used US support. We used local forces, and as much as my kids wouldn't believe me, we used technology as well at that time to enhance. So we found a way to build capability fairly quickly. But again, those circumstances can differ depending on the time and the situation. So one of the things we find, though, that's certainly most within our control is building our own capability. So it's always something that we can control. And what we've found is there's quite a high demand from defence people to attend our language courses. And again, this may be something different that you're seeing with other testimony to the inquiry. So for example, we run a language assessment test at the start of someone applying to do language courses. And one of the reasons that we do that is to see their aptitude, to say, can you study this language or that? But another is a simple triage requirement. So over time, we've had multiple thousand applicants in any given year applying to undertake language training. So there is still, I think, within Defence, still a demand to undertake that language training. One of the things that everyone struggles with, it's very, very hard, is retention of those language skills if you're not using them. And we've taken a number of measures to try and increase retention. So in 2022, after 4 years, we found that only 19% had retained their language skills. We assessed that again in 2025 and found that had improved to 34%. So there's a number of things that we're doing to retain skills. So I think there's still a demand internally to have them, but the challenge of retaining those skills is still very, very hard. Yep.
If I may just add, I know whole of government efforts are a focus of the committee as well. Defence, ADF and APS certainly take advantage of the opportunities that DFAT provides, some of which are informal, like lunchtime sessions at DFAT twice a week with a homework from a teacher to study an article and then come and have a discussion and so forth. So some of those informal opportunities are really useful, particularly in the retention of language and bringing people together to be able to have those conversations to keep up their language skills. But there's also more intensive language training opportunities that DFAT provides through the year that certainly people are able to take advantage of, including APS from Defence.
Yeah. Do you want to watch us?
Well, I must say that I was impressed with His Excellency David Hurley's Bahasa Indonesia retention during his time as Governor-General. He deployed it very effectively in the national interest.
Look, I guess my just slight follow-up then is, so if there was a concerted effort to increase that capability across the Defence Force, there is that demand, there is that appetite, provided that funding could be supplied in order for that to happen, as well as opportunities to maintain it through different kind of conversation groups as well. There is that willingness and enthusiasm for that.
I think that's fair to say, and I do say that cautiously because again, you're never sure exactly why that's the case. Certainly the number of applicant decisions indicates that there is, and there are, exactly as you say. If we needed to surge capability, there are a range of measures we could take, which could include teaming up with universities to provide more support. It could be providing more military instruction, so we've got a greater number of instructors that are providing that. It could be, again, more investment in technology. I think there's a range of measures that, should we need to surge a requirement, we could. We always find it being a very imprecise sort of estimate of how many people do we need qualified in a certain language at a certain time. The number of contingencies that Defence would have to be ready to undertake is extraordinarily wide. So, but yes, I think the premise is correct of your question. Yeah.
Very good. I just might also note that I think the data collection in Defence on this, with the census and the planning, is admirable. In fact, I feel like you have a better feel for this than we do in the education space. So that's a model we could learn from. I might now move on to some questions for Home Affairs. Does anyone want any more on Defence? Okay, we might come back to you, but don't run away. My questions to Home Affairs are primarily focused on the community language stream, so I'm not sure who's best placed to... Yep, okay. So we've heard a series of submissions to this inquiry from a range of bodies about the role that community language schools can play in supporting the base level of Asian language learning in Australia. And I know that Home Affairs recognises the importance of community language schools through the Community Language Schools Grants program. And I acknowledge that we've got Stream 1 investing in a range of things, including professional development and teacher training. And then Stream 2 will provide funding to support more students to become fluent in Asian languages in years 11 and 12. One of the things that comes through very strongly in the submission is the variance across our federation in the way that community language schools operate and their relationship with both secondary schooling systems and tertiary education institutions, and the real absence of coordination across states and territories, and very different approaches to recognition of both teaching qualifications and student outcomes in community language programs. In that context, I want to get a feel for the way Home Affairs engages with this as a policy challenge, and that's all to say I know it's hard. But do you coordinate with the Commonwealth Education Department on best practice in community language education? If you do, what is your view of what best practice is, and do we have a coordinated approach for trying to propagate best practice across the states?
Yeah, thanks. I might start by talking about the engagement process we had with regard to designing, particularly the Asian fluency part of the Community Language Schools program. So we did consult not just with the Commonwealth Education Department, but also the states and territories. We consulted elsewhere within the Commonwealth Government. One of the challenges we found, going to your particular point, and we did find this as the policy challenge, is just how we could land at a priority list of Asian languages. So the approach that we took was largely inclusive. So the different states and territories had different requirements with regard to which languages to prioritise. So we basically included all of them. We needed a priority list in order to basically form a view of what an eligible application was going to be. As a result of the consultation, we actually have ended up with probably one of the more inclusive lists of languages, because we didn't want to basically unwittingly exclude particular languages. So that's that component. The bit around the educational standards, we do seek to use expert advice in the course of assessing how well a grant program is running, and that's probably going to tie to an annual acquittal process at the moment with the new round, but it isn't tested yet because the round is new.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but I mean, let me take you to one of the submissions that have been made to the inquiry from the University of Sydney. They seem to support this Sydney Institute for Community Languages Education that provides pathways for community language teachers into further study and employment, tries to develop an evidence base for schools and language policy, and offers accreditation and education programs for community language teachers. I mean, that seems to be having a structured approach to building institutional capacity here, and for allowing the community language sector to sort of fill some of the shortfalls in school Asian language teachers that the shortages that we've heard about. I mean, is that kind of structured approach something that's on your radar? I mean, or is these grants kind of more of an ad hoc trying to sustain existing schools rather than to sort of build out a system?
That's a good question. So the Stream 1 is in large part an extension of what had gone before. So in that regard, that is basically sustainment. Yep. The Stream 2 is the Asian literacy, the Asian fluency, particularly to years 11 and year 12. That's pretty much new territory for us. We haven't actually completed the assessment process yet. But yeah, in the course of doing that, I'd anticipate that we would be doing things like encouraging, particularly community language schools, to work with communities of practice, etc. Mm-hmm. And we are also talking to peak body associations as well.
And is there any coordinating mechanism for bringing together the various community language teaching associations or schools with state and territory education departments? I mean, how do these groups talk to each other about aligning each other's efforts and interests so that there's a consistent pathway for students?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I actually don't know the answer.
Yeah, okay. As a coordination, I mean, our federation is a beautiful and unique thing. It creates challenges for our policy making. Let me come back to this. I will first throw to Dr. Garland, who has some questions on this, and then come back with that later.
I'm going to continue the theme of federation, which I'm sure everyone's really pleased to talk about. But really, in my conversations that I have as a Victorian with community language schools, and thinking to the grant programs that are administered, it has been observed, and this has been reported to me, so I accept this as anecdotal, that there is inequity in the system because different states and territories have different arrangements with community language school providers in terms of things like using public school assets for free use on weekends for community language schools and it feels like people are very familiar with this one, in New South Wales versus Victoria, where that grant funding then gets just absorbed into giving money back to the state government to hire public schools. And so it has been raised with me that, I think for the delivery of language programs to be more equitable across the country and accessible and to support teachers, there is a view that it would be good to see more harmonisation. Now, I don't know exactly how that's going to be possible and how those, MOUs or whatever it is get entered into and contracts with the different states and territories. But I would really appreciate, hearing more about that. And, I know as well a lot of the schools for some languages, Mandarin, for instance, are absolutely at capacity. And that's, presenting challenges to people in the community. So yeah, love to hear your thoughts. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Garland. I think consistent with the feedback you're getting is that all communities, regardless of whether it's a community language school or any other community, have access to amenities, so access to schools or access to community centres. And we know there is a great deal of variation across the states. The way that we've run our processes is with the schools directly. And there's about 600 who are funded through Stream 1, which covers very, very tiny language schools right through to Mandarin classes that, as you say, are at big capacity. We do try and deconflict with state education departments. But each of the arrangements do differ between the states, and we defer to Department of Education around those types of MOUs and arrangements they might have about access to facilities. But our grant agreement is directly with the individual school.
Yeah, so they could have that. Yeah, the agreements with the school, and then there's a separate arrangement they would have with the Departments of Education, understandings between the states and territories in the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
Okay.
They also, I also know states and territories do fund community language schools, so there might be kind of two streams of funding that they're receiving.
Some do.
Yeah, some do.
Yeah, there's I think
and
they've
it
got
does
to make a
depend on
choice
state to state.
in Victoria, for instance, again, which stream they're going to access. But thank you very much.
And just to confirm, there's no institutional structure then to coordinate the Commonwealth and community language and states on curriculum or pathways or accreditation or funding models or anything. It's atomised. Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Burrell?
We hear from, I suppose we're trying to get to the bottom of why we don't have more Asian languages taught in schools, and we're hearing about demand, but we're also hearing about the supply of teachers. And I notice, in your submission, we talk a bit about visas. Could you talk about what you think the there appears to be a shortage of Asian language teachers in Australia. There are obviously a lot of people overseas who are educated who would like to come here and teach Asian languages. Can you talk a bit about what you think the roadblock might be?
Mr. Brunel, there's a few elements to it. So what I'd start with is pointing out that teachers more broadly, so the education profession, has been a focus in the skilled migration program for probably 3 or 4 years now. In fact, they receive priority processing educators along with medical professionals. And what we've seen is pretty strong growth in teachers in the broad. When you look at primary school, high school, lecturers, all those sort of categories. So what we see there is a skilled program that can deliver more teachers. We've also worked to promote, I guess, Australia as a destination for appropriately qualified teachers, and that's been reasonably successful. We do that through some pretty subtle work in social media and LinkedIn and that sort of stuff, so we're not broad brushing it. We're targeting particular individuals who will have the qualifications but also are coming from a system where their qualifications can be easily recognised. So those elements are positive. We're also seeing within the points test that governs eligibility for skilled migration, there are additional points available for community language skills. So that's another element that favours people with community language skills. I think the challenges go to where the language teachers with the right set of skills are coming from and how easy it is for them to be appropriately accredited with whichever state and territory education department it might be to be able to teach. So that's an issue. But I think if you look in the broad, the numbers of educators coming to Australia through the migration program is certainly growing.
Thank you.
Mr. Singh?
Thank you, Chair. Well, firstly, I just wanted to say how great it is to see the Office of Multicultural Affairs in existence and to hear some of the work that you're doing. My question is just returning back to the community language program side of things. So in my electorate, I have a number of community language schools that I've engaged with. And one of the things that they've outlined is some of the practical challenges. And Dr. Garland alluded to before, in New South Wales, public schools do offer their facilities to these community language schools, but it can be inconsistent and it's reliant on the individual schools making that decision. But again, what I've heard from schools as well is some are reluctant to take on a perceived risk or potential risk of having to share facilities and properties with community language schools. Is there any work that's being done or considered in sending messages to schools, to local councils who have facilities, that actually this is a national priority and that, like, on the balance of probability, if you're unsure, this is something that you might want to kind of stick your hand up? Because look, often the practical barriers are the reason why things don't get off the ground in the end, and that's what I'm consistently hearing from community language providers.
There's no particular line of effort around that proactive communication with schools, but we can certainly, when we meet with our state education contacts and indeed with the state multicultural agencies or business areas in Premier's departments, for example, we can raise it. I know that they also would raise it themselves, both with local councils and with individual schools. And we know that those arrangements do differ between states, particularly in New South Wales and Victoria. Yeah. But it's consistent as well with that kind of wider conversation about access to community amenities.
Yeah, because the reason why I mention is I do find myself having conversations with some of these groups and stakeholders in the community where we hear time after time from witnesses how important Asian language development, Asian capability is more broadly, but then when you kind of see it translated into community sometimes, there is some frustration that kind of national sentiment is not shared on the ground because of real practical constraints.
I'd also note that this Stream 2 component of CLSG is, it's a new part of the program, and we'd want to evaluate as we roll it out. So we're doing the assessment at the moment. So 2.5 million for round one. we do an assessment and evaluate kind of the outcomes of this particular grant program. And I think reflecting on the work we've done, thinking about this inquiry, is also what are the learnings that we can take from this program and engage with state education departments on it, not just in terms of their formal, the formal curriculum, but also in terms of community language schools and grants that they might be giving to them themselves.
On that, if that's okay. So I think in Victoria we've had some VCE programs, so Mandarin as a first language as well as a second language, well established as part of our Year 11 and 12 curriculum. That's sort of less so for other languages. And I guess, having spoken to other witnesses as well through the process of these hearings, like that understanding of fluency and proficiency and attainment at that kind of level has something that's not always been the objective of language programs in Australia. So it'd be really interesting to understand what that kind of fluency looks like, how that relates to first and second language as well, in terms of those cohorts in Year 11 and 12, because often people that attend community language schools have some kind of cultural and familial connection to language to begin with.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would have to say that as part of the stakeholder consultations and in our design, I don't think we envisaged that a community language school alone would get you to a point of fluency. It's a contributing factor, but yeah, I don't think we had consciously designed that program to lead to a point of fluency in and of itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No, so I'm just wondering what the $5 million, like, to support them to become fluent. It's just this is complementary to what they would do at home and school, or school. How would we assess
It's one
that?
of another factors. When we did the consultation, we were talking about the policy issue of the day, I suppose, for want of a better way to put it. And as Ms. Chatterjee's pointed out, that we will review and then evolve with the next round of the process. We found that the two critical issues that we needed to address, and that's why we've actually changed our criteria, I guess, is the just the lack of enrolment in that year 11 and year 12 at that level, and aside that is the question about the ability for the language schools to teach at that particular level. So that's been the primary policy focus for this particular round at the moment.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's certainly been a consistent theme of this inquiry, the lack of joined up pathways for people to develop their language capability across the various institutions, primary, secondary, community language, university, defence, to have a consistent pathway to people to build over time. It's the joining fibres that are missing. And the joining fibres between community language schools and formal schooling education vary extraordinarily state to state. In Victoria, we have the Victorian School Languages that I think does a good job in lots of ways, but one gap that I see as a local member is between established language schools and emerging languages. So, I have the second largest Indian-born electorate in Australia, and I've spoken to plenty of parents that want their kids learning, not just Hindi, Bengali, Kannada, Malayalam, Telugu, Punjabi, Tamil. And there are a lot of community language schools that have emerged in recent years, very new, some with as much cultural education as language education, but they haven't made that bridge yet to the VCE curriculums. I know there's an enormous latent demand there. How do we translate that latent demand and jump from these new and very these new emerging community language schools into formal curricula? Is that something that was grappled with in the consultations?
That's why when I started with my first answer, I led with that, what's a priority language? Because we found in our stakeholder consultation that the retention of year 11 and year 12 students in a community language school, it was tended to be higher if it was already in the national curriculum, like if it was actually contributing to university scores, scores to get into university. And we did grapple because we also looked at the makeup of our understanding of multicultural communities across Australia and just where, what languages were spoken, and there was a definite divide.
But Bengali is a good example because that's in the VCE. It's a intensely passionate language, and it's Birth Mother Tongue Day. This is a community that is intensely invested in language as an expression of culture, but I still don't see it coming through in the VCE programs.
I went to Bengali language school. And, I didn't do it in VCE either.
So
it was a long time ago
why didn't
Victoria. But
I wasn't offered then.
It was show my age, a bit more than 20 years ago. But I think there is that kind of challenge. The other thing I'd just note across the Office for Multicultural Affairs is we're engaging with a whole breadth of communities, and particularly new and emerging communities. So community language schools generally, traditionally dominated by well-established communities who've got a long tradition of Saturday morning language classes. I think
or Sunday.
Or Sunday, or after school, but the kind of established infrastructure around that community. And what we do see is where there are new and emerging communities, as they become more organised and kind of, community associations, then, we do make sure they get information around programs that might be available. And that certainly, it takes a number of years for that to kind of wash through the system. We couldn't comment on the VCE or HSC component of the formalisation, but certainly there's continued growth in what communities are accessing the program.
Mr. Burrell?
Yeah, thank you. I come from, I'm the member for Nichols in Northern Victoria, and a big part of my electorate and my home is Greater Shepparton. Now, Greater Shepparton is, I think, and I think it's acknowledged as one of the real success stories of multiculturalism in this country. I've got my own views, but I'm trying to seek out from my community leaders and all sorts of people about why we've been so successful. And I'm going to throw something out there just for comment, if you want to, about why we've had such success. An Albanian community leader told me that the lack of Albanian language in all of the resources in the 60s actually led to learning English faster and being able to develop businesses and I'm going to say integrate. I don't like the word assimilate. I like integrate into the community whilst having their own culture and faith, which has really become, and the Albanian community is such an important part. And I think that's happened on and on. So, I'm not saying that that's my view, but the priority to make sure that these new communities can speak and function in English to become part of our communities whilst preserving their own culture. Could you just comment on where you see that going, or what you view on that in the office?
Yeah. Thanks, Deputy Chair. So within the Office for Multicultural Affairs, we administer the Adult Migrant English Program, and we also deliver settlement services for humanitarian entrants, many of whom have made their home in Shepparton, for example. So that's the humanitarian stream of the migration program. The settlement outcomes framework that we have does certainly place the importance of speaking English as a key contributor to a successful settlement outcome. And so absolutely being able to speak English, being able to attend AMEP classes for adults or English as a second language components in the primary and secondary education critical. I think Dr. Garland earlier made a comment around the cultural and connection component of community language schools. So that wider, I guess, contribution that community language schools makes to the multicultural community, not just about educational outcomes, but also about that connection to the family culture, is probably the added component. But absolutely speaking English is important. It's a pathway to employment. Employment is critical for another element of the successful settlement outcome. So,
Okay, so just to follow up, I suppose, you know, the priority of I mean, English is our national language, and there are concerns in my community and other communities about social cohesion if we have a lot of groups of people not learning English as the common denominator and really sticking with their own language generally and not developing that skill. So it's just, I suppose it's a, you know, is there a priority on making sure that people have those tools to be able to integrate into society and get a job, start a business, all the great things that you can see have happened in Shepparton.
absolutely.
Thank you.
I think if you look at that, the scale of the investment that governments for decades have made in terms of the English language program, you can see there's a strong recognition of that, a strong focus on that. And then if you look at outside of humanitarian programs, if you look at the way, for example, skilled migrants are selected, English language skills are a huge part of that selection process. They provide a big chunk of the points that go towards meeting eligibility as a skilled migrant. So I think that's recognised. There's also recognition of the importance of the community languages as well.
Thank you.
Excellent. No more? Okay, well, thank you for coming today. I found that very interesting, and I don't envy the policy challenges that we all face here. Thank you for your attendance today. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence, and we'll have an opportunity to request corrections to transcription errors. Please send your responses to any questions taken on notice during this hearing to the Secretariat by the close of business on Wednesday, 18 March 2026. I now declare this public meeting closed.